Hello and welcome to another edition of Truth is Making a Comeback, a production of LibertyNation.com. I'm Leesa Donner. On today's episode, even the party of doom and gloom had some funny moments this week. We bring you the funnies from the CNN Democratic debates. Forget about bats. We have rats in the Baltimore Belfry. More on that with economic correspondent Andrew Moran. The presidential horse race tightens. Managing editor Mark Angelides has all the polls and betting odds for you. And finally, voting with your wallet. Just how much of your hard-earned cash ends up in the pockets of the left. You may be surprised. All this and more coming right up. Stay tuned. This week, the bell rang for round two of the Democratic debates. A bevy of Democrats looking to unseat Donald Trump from the presidency took to a Detroit stage over 2 nights. The CNN debate revealed a split in ideology, with progressives and moderates aiming for the heart and soul of the party. The elite liberal media endeavored to declare winners and losers, but perhaps the biggest loser was the American people, as the CNN format permitted only enough time for pithy sound bites with little in the way of substance. But that actually made for some funny moments. Joining me now is Tim Donner, Liberty Nation's Washington political columnist. Hi, Tim, and welcome to Truth is Making a Comeback.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. Appreciate it.
All right. There certainly were some laugh-out-loud moments during this week's debates. Not sure if you read Graham J. Noble's article on Liberty Nation, but he said the most hilarious moment for him was the claim by Senator Bernie Sanders that under universal health care, hospitals would save money by not having to deal with the bureaucracy of the insurance companies. Of course, the humorous part of that is that they would then have to deal with the bureaucratic nightmare of the federal government.
Yeah, sort of like a choice between Hitler and Stalin for consumers of health care. I mean, I don't know which they hate more, insurance companies or the Congress, whose approval rating is now running neck and neck with used car dealers.
Well, we've got 5 fun moments that you've plucked out of the debates this week. Let's start with number 1. It's quite an exchange between Senator Spartacus and Vice President Joe Biden, the former vice president.
Well, it's true, Lisa. I mean, despite his poor performance in the first debate, Joe Biden still went into the second round of debates with about a 15-point lead. And so, of course, he was the punching bag, as expected, all night. But incredibly, the vice president, for the nation's first black president, had to again defend himself on the issue of race from the likes of Cory Booker, Spartacus, who went after Biden for his authoring of crime bills, which increased incarceration rates dramatically. And Spartacus dropped a line that went viral.
Mr. Vice President has said that since the 1970s, every crime bill, major and minor, has had his name on it. And sir, those are your words, not mine. There are people right now in prison for life for drug offenses because you stood up and used that tough on crime, phony rhetoric that got a lot of people elected, but destroyed communities like mine. The house was set on fire, and you claimed responsibility for those laws. And you can't just now come out with a plan to put out that fire.
In 2007, you became mayor. And you had a police department you went out and you hired Rudy Giuliani's guy. You engaged in stop and frisk. 3 times as many African-American kids were caught in that chain and caught up. The Justice Department came after you for engaging in behavior that was inappropriate.
If you want to compare records, and frankly, I'm shocked that you do, there's a saying in my community, you're dipping into the Kool-Aid and you don't even know the flavor. You need to come to...
Wow, so he just couldn't stop himself from his own stereotype.
Well, it's true. But at the same time, remember that these political midgets like Cory Booker, who are running at about 2-3%, needed some kind of line that would go viral, that would define his performance and get him some much needed media attention. So he did manage to do that.
All right, our next funny centers on Uncle Joe, and it was quite incredible that he couldn't spit out his own URL, but this exchange is something with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Take us through it.
Well, Joe Biden, after being attacked on the issue of race by Cory Booker, was attacked on the issue of sexism by one of the real midgets in the race, Kirsten Gillibrand, who's gotten absolutely no traction at all. But Joe Biden, the former vice president, wasn't going to put up with both Harris calling him out on race and the opportunist Kirsten Gillibrand on women's rights.
I came up with the It's On Us proposal to see to it that women were treated more decently on college campuses. You came to Syracuse University with me and said it was wonderful. I'm passionate about the concern, making sure women are treated equally. I don't know what's happened except that you're now running for president.
So I understand, Mr. Vice President.
Now, I will say that was a shameless exploitation of my alma mater, Syracuse University, which also was where Joe Biden went to law school. But, he had some lines prepared and had done his homework on candidates like Booker and Gillibrand, who he knew were going to attack him.
Well, we won't hold Syracuse against you at this moment, but the way CNN set up the debate was really just a setup for sound bites, as I mentioned. And the one that had the best sound bites was John Hickenlooper.
Indeed. I mean, this was a debate where moderates were given a decent amount of time. These are mostly low-polling centrists or really old-time liberals. And they served as a reality check on the front-runners in the race, like Harris and Sanders. John Hickenlooper delivered a very memorable line in saying that Medicare for all will deliver the election to Donald Trump on a silver platter.
This notion that you're going to take private insurance away from 180 million Americans, who many of them don't want to give it. Many of them do want to get rid of it, but some don't. That is a disaster at the ballot box. You might as well FedEx the election to Donald Trump.
The people in brown over at UPS are going to take exception to this.
A good point. I hope there's no revelation that former Governor Hickenlooper was on the take from FedEx, but it's in the common parlance. So he made the point, though, that was critical that the moderates were making all night, which is in both nights, that if you want to continue on this path towards the leftward cliff, you're going to get beat in the general election, and it's not going to be close.
Good grief. I hope Hickenlooper doesn't own stock in FedEx. Anyway, this next one features Senator Bernie Sanders, and frankly, it's my personal favorite. It seems like Bernie is really feeling the burn. He's angry all the time.
Well, do you remember the old political party that started a few years ago? It's called the Rent's Too Damn High Party. Well, in a way, old Bernie was kind of channeling that. The self-proclaimed democratic socialist, he sounded annoyed at being challenged by the moderate Tim Ryan on Bernie's Medicare for All bill, which Bernie wrote himself. And he says they'll raise taxes on the middle class, but they'll still be better off in the long run. And then listen to his finishing line.
They will be better because Medicare for All is comprehensive. It covers all health care needs. For senior citizens, it will finally include dental care, hearing aids, and eyeglasses.
But you don't know.
Second of all.
You don't know that,
Second
Bernie.
of all.
We'll come to you in a second,
I do know, and I wrote the damn bill.
I wrote the damn bill. I mean, that he did write the bill. And he's the one who's drawn many of these other senators running for president as co-sponsors of it, which of course is death politically for most of them. But, he was annoying. It was like he was swatting off Tim Ryan like he was some kind of insect who was annoying him.
Yeah, it seemed to me like between Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren, both of them just seemed so angry all night.
Well, the whole party is angry. The whole party is deranged. They've been driven mad, essentially, by Donald Trump. They've tried everything they can to get rid of him. They've failed. They don't know where to go. They're in two different civil wars right now, one between Pelosi and AOC plus 3 for control of the party, and now one on the presidential side between the radicals who are running towards the top of the polling, except for Biden, and the moderates who are trying to take the party back from the cliff.
Yeah, good point. Well, finally, for the funnies, we have Mr. Andrew Yang, who insists on repeatedly stereotyping himself.
And it's kind of refreshing, honestly, Lisa, that he would break out of this mold of political correctness, which has kept all the candidates in line. Andrew Yang is a very successful entrepreneur who at least injected some humor into these self-serious proceedings by really playing up his own racial stereotype.
We need to do the opposite of much of what we're doing right now, and the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes masks.
Now, I don't know if that ding at the end was, yes, he scored the point, or that was just the end of his time. We need an Asian guy who can do math in the White House.
Well, speaking of end of times, we're about to wrap this up. Very funny stuff. That's my better half, Tim Donner, LN's Washington political columnist, and if I may say so myself, a very funny guy. If you have a chance, hit libertynation.com and read Tim's article after the debates, quote, The Democrats' Triangle of Doom. Really, really good stuff. Thanks for joining us today, Tim.
A pleasure as always, Lisa.
The city of Baltimore has been in the news ever since President Trump issued a blistering attack on the city and one of its representatives, Elijah Cummings. Liberty Nation's Andrew Moran called it another instance when the American people are watching two separate movies on the same screen again. To those who accept reality, he wrote, Baltimore is a dumpster fire of a city engulfed in the flames of corruption, destitution, and mortification. To those who can never agree with President Donald Trump on the most elementary objective truth, Baltimore's tragedies are really being distorted by people who suffer from supposed anarchic insecurities. Andrew joins us now from a safe distance, namely Toronto. Welcome to Truth is Making a Comeback, Andrew. Now, your article had a lot of great tongue-in-cheek references. You write, quote, we live in an age when the president tells the truth and the media try their best to prove that the opposite is true. If Trump were to say that water is wet and necessary to live, the mainstream press would have wall-to-wall coverage of why this is climate change denial, racist, and grounds for impeachment. Very funny stuff. But as Liberty Nation's economic correspondent, you dig into some of the ugly stats in Baltimore. So Trump wasn't really making this stuff up.
Yes, if I first may say that if I were to write a book about Baltimore, and I would want you to narrate, that's perfect explanation of my article. But yeah, Trump is right. I hear that the rat problem is so bad in Baltimore that residents are actually using real life mice for their computers. When I was looking through the comments, I couldn't help but wonder if it were true that President Trump thinks nobody wants to live there. If you look at the Census Bureau data, government data, it shows that people are actually leaving the city. In the 12 months ending July 1st, 2018, roughly about 7,000 people were leaving. That's about a little more than 1% of the population. Now, 1% may not seem like much, but this is the largest single year drop in more than 2 decades, and it's also the fourth straight annual population decrease. So he is right. I mean, that CNN anchor can cry that nobody wants to live there, but the data show that Baltimoreans want to leave. They want to go to the suburbs, or they want to go to neighboring states.
Right, and the problem with this is that there are fewer people to pay the tax dollars, and Maryland has got some super duper taxes. Yeah, Baltimore, they have a huge property tax rate of, I think it's about 2.5%. So if you have a $500,000 house, that's a gigantic tax you're paying on this property. The issue, however, is that when people are leaving the city, the remaining people have to pay
repay the burden that's left by those people who are leaving. And the other issue is that a lot of well-connected people in Baltimore, they get significant tax breaks. So I think I was reading the National Review how this Four Seasons development, they paid about 16 times less than what the average Baltimore resident pays. And could you that's fair? I don't think so.
Well, you also mentioned that Baltimore is most robbed city. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you look at the FBI data from, I think the latest was 2017, on a per 100,000 population basis, the homicide rate is 55.7, robberies 958, aggravated assault is 949, motor vehicle theft is 843. So the numbers are astounding. It's the most robbed city. It's considered one of the most robbed cities and one of the most dangerous cities in America. Do you want to live? Do you want to live in one of the most dangerous cities in America? I'm pretty sure the most reasonable people would say no, they do not.
So when you look at Baltimore, it's right up there with Chicago, etc.
Yeah, the homicide rate, I think I said it was 55.7. So there is significant gun violence there, and I believe they also have strict gun laws too. So. Of course, the go back argument is that when you have significant gun laws, you have an increased crime because the average resident can't defend themselves.
Yeah, they recently had a gun buyback, which I always find funny because the government didn't own the guns in the first place. But they did have a, cash for guns program, which basically means that if you're in Baltimore and somebody comes up to rob you, the chances of a citizen who is a law-abiding citizen having a gun in Maryland is almost nil.
Well, you have to go back to what former President Barack Obama was talking about after the Freddie Gray incident. He was talking about how a lot of the kids there, a lot of the kids who participate in gangs, they don't have father figures. Larry Elder talks about this all the time. So they go into crime, and the education there is abysmal. So kids who may want to have an education, they can't because they're spending $16,000 a student, which is about $4,000 more than the national average, and there's nothing to show for it. The literacy rate is horrible, math proficiency is horrible, and those who are actually fortunate to graduate from high school, they have to have remedial assistance for mathematics and English when they go to a 2-year or 4-year college program. So, the drugs are contributing to it, the crime is contributing to it, and, good for President Trump for pointing this out. It's just that it's the fact that, people suffer from this Trump derangement syndrome that when you point out something factual and it shows that the Democrats are the cause of that problem, then nobody really wants to admit it. They just want to go to the default excuse of that's racism. It's preposterous.
Right. So Baltimore is really kind of a third world country.
Yes, that's exactly what Senator Bernie Sanders said in 2015 when he was touring there for his presidential campaign. And Elijah Cummings, he said it, I think it was in 1999 or 2001, something around that time. He said that Baltimore is a drug-infested community. So why is it racist or wrong for Bernie Sanders to say it or Elijah Cummings to say it?
Well, you make a really good point there. Anything else about Baltimore that you think people should know? Because your article is entitled "Let's Get Real." So let's get real.
Yeah. Since I'm the economics correspondent, I'm really fascinated about economics. So if you look at the economics of Baltimore, the data is interesting. You have a 6% jobless rate. 1/4 of the city lives in poverty. They just had an IKEA furniture plant shut down. A GM plant also shuttered their doors. So Baltimore used to be a huge economic driver of the United States. Years ago, it was one of the leaders of manufacturing energy. Now it's just it's a dumpster fire. It is that rat-infested, literally, city that President Trump was talking about, and they got $1.9 billion or $1.3 billion from President Obama, and you wonder, where did that money go to? Wasn't it supposed to go to stimulus? Wasn't it supposed to improve housing? Where did all this money go? So the city is dreadful, and don't get me started on the Baltimore Orioles. One of the worst teams in baseball.
Yeah, when I moved to the Washington, D.C. area some 30 years ago, we went up to the Inner Harbor when they first opened, the baseball park in Baltimore, Camden Yards. Anyway, the Inner Harbor was really beautiful. It was wonderful. Fast forward a couple of decades, and somebody said to me, don't go to the Inner Harbor. it's crime infested.
Yeah, why would you want to go to somewhere that's crime infested? So that's not wrong. So good on you for being safe that way.
Yeah, but I just found that's quite a turnaround in a couple of decades, that it went from a kind of a beautiful inner harbor area, like Trump said, to a rat-infested, high robbery, vandalization area.
Well, it was around the 1980s and 1990s that you started to see this shift. There was this thing called the white flight, and then there was a thing called the black flight that happened around in a 20-year period. So all this capital was leaving the city, and all the money was going to the neighboring suburbs and the neighboring states and neighboring cities that had better tax conditions, had better education. So the population decrease did play a significant part to Baltimore's demise.
All right, thank you very much for joining us on Truth is Making a Comeback. Andrew Moran, our economics correspondent on LibertyNation.com. Let's get real about Baltimore. That's Andrew's article. Got to read it, guys. Really good stuff. Andrew is a rising star. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Far and away the most popular article of the week on LibertyNation.com was an article entitled "Presidential Race Tightens Up, Trump Out in Front," written by managing editor Mark Angelides. Each week, Mark puts out the latest numbers from the polls, as well as those all-important betting odds. The president's approval rating has been hovering in the high 40s for some time now. Former Vice President Joe Biden and Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren are out in front of the Democratic field. While it may seem early, there are a lot of numbers to crunch. Mark joins us now for a closer look at the horse race from across the pond. Hello, Mark. It seems you've just finished a horse race of your own in the UK with Boris Johnson.
Yep, sure have. It was not an unexpected victory for Prime Minister Johnson, or Bojo as we call him. But it's a pretty welcome one to all those who support Brexit. Pretty welcome.
All right. Well, I think the people were wildly interested in your story entitled "Presidential Race Tightens Up, Trump Out in Front." So let's go to those ever wacky polls. I remember back in 2015 or so, we would check every morning Pat Caddell, who sadly has passed away, Rasmussen, and the ever-present LA tracking poll. So those were our three go-tos, of course, also RCP. What do you have for us this morning?
Okay, well, if you start off with your Rasmussen, you're talking about Donald Trump's approval is hovering between 48-49%, which is pretty much where he's been, I think, for the last 4 months. He's around 48 to 50%. It's almost unshakable, which is quite interesting. And what I find more interesting is that Donald Trump's approval always seems to be just 1 point ahead where Barack Obama was at the same time in his presidency. So that's always fun.
Well, that's very astute. I hadn't thought of that, that it's so close to Obama's. What else are you finding out?
Well, do you want to hear about Donald Trump, or do you want to hear about the Democratic race?
Well, I guess let's find out who among the Democrats are giving him a little bit of a run for his money.
There's really only three who are in the top contenders. You've got Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Elizabeth Warren. Everybody else, including Bernie Sanders, despite hanging on for grim death, Bernie Sanders looks like he's on his way out there. And everybody else, so your Pete Buttigieg, your Andrew Yangs, they're just so far behind that there's no help for them.
Buttigieg's having real troubles today, and I think this might be his basically his swan song, but he may never have wanted to or expected to get to the top of this. He's a very young guy.
I would agree with that. It's more like he's popping his toes in the water to see what it's like. I expect we'll see him again in 2024. Almost definitely, if he hasn't already made a Senate run by then. But yeah, I think that was more an exploratory campaign for him than an actual shot at the presidency.
So we have Joe, Kamala, and Pocahontas. Who's zooming who there? I mean, what's happening since the debate?
Well, it's really a question of, do you believe the money bettors or do you believe the polls?
I believe the money people.
Yeah, me too. That's where I go every time as well. The polls we saw from the 2016 election, polls aren't really to be trusted. So following your money bettors, you've got Joe Biden. He's on 12 to 5 to win the nomination. Kamala Harris 11 to 4. That's pretty close. Elizabeth Warren on 3 to 1. Now, here's the thing. If we can assume that this is going to be a straight race, played down the line, no fanciful juggling on behalf of the DNC in terms of what they do, Biden's the winner. It's completely there. I mean, he's got in most of your polls now, most of the major polls, he's 13, 14, 15, even up to 18 points ahead of his other counterparts in the Democratic Party in terms of a lead. And in every matchup against Donald Trump in the polls, he wins. But you and I, we don't believe the polls. We believe the money bettors, right?
Right. Now, I don't want to necessarily give them a commercial, but who are the money bettors? Are you consulting American money bettors or British money bettors or worldwide money bettors?
So what I do is I run almost an aggregation of American bettors, Brit bettors, and European bettors. And I put those together. I don't put them together, but I use the aggregation of those numbers. So it's pretty much it's an across-the-board thing, although the majority comes from America. So it's very much based on the American audience, with a little bit of betting in from the UK, a little bit of betting from Europe, a little bit from South America as well.
That's interesting. So this basically is the Liberty Nation Money Bettors RCP, right? In other words, it's an amalgam of the polls.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you believe that this early, it's even worth looking at the polls?
Oh yeah, I mean, it gives you an indication because although it's not going to give you a final outlook when it comes to the actual election time, it is going to shape, and that's really the purpose of having so many polls. It's to shape public opinion in the lead up to whittling down the candidates to who's left. So for example, we're seeing, as I mentioned, we're seeing the Biden polls 14, 15, 18 points ahead of every other contender. So what's happening is in the DNC, the people are looking, they're thinking, we've got to run with Biden. And whether that's on the VP ticket again, because he's done that job before, or as the main man, they've got to be asking themselves, this is the person we're going to be favoring. And we do know, based on their past performance, that they do favor candidates. So yeah, it's important to have the polling because it allows us on the outside to see what's happening on the inside and maybe draw extrapolations of what the party itself is thinking in terms of how they're going to roll out these candidates to the public.
Good stuff. All good stuff. Thank you very much. Managing editor Mark Angelides wrote Presidential Race Tightens Up, Trump Out in Front. Be sure to check it out. Also, every week he is author of Gunslingers for Liberty, which is kind of the top stories of the week. Definitely tune in to LibertyNation.com. Thanks so much for joining us from the UK. Say hi to Boris for me, Mark.
Will do.
Bye. And now for this week's parting shot. Who says you only get one vote? This may be true with respect to casting a ballot, but every time you reach for that old trusty wallet, you're exercising your franchise. By and large, Americans vote their pocketbook at the polls. But how many of us think that what we're voting with is our pocketbook every time we pull into the drive-thru at Mickey D's for a Big Mac? Some have taken to calling this the second vote. And in these divisive political times, inquiring minds may want to know where their hard-earned dollars end up. Or maybe not. Ignorance can be bliss. So if you need a 12-step program to recover from your Amazon addiction, you may want to stick your head in the sand, put your fingers in your ears, and hum a few bars of the Star-Spangled Banner, rather than hearing the alarming truth. Amazon's misguided activities include signing a Supreme Court amicus brief to force unwilling bakers into making cakes for same-sex weddings. Prime heads also support the Paris Climate Accords and sponsor a group that lobbies on behalf of sanctuary cities. Next-day delivery may just have to be put on hold, permanent political hold. But Amazon has plenty of company, no pun intended. The retail world is fraught with liberal landmines. Run-of-the-mill stores like CVS, Apple, Victoria's Secret, Sam's Club, Dollar General, and yes, even Walmart and Levi Strauss cough up the big bucks for liberal causes. But don't despair, there are still places where conservatives can shop and not pour their money down a leftist rat hole. Overstock.com, Bed Bath & Beyond, Bass Pro Shops, Hobby Lobby, and even Wayfair.com turn out to be not such a bad bang for your buck. This doesn't mean these retailers are solidly in the conservative camp, but it's all relative, folks. Then there's the world of entertainment. As you might well imagine, making people laugh or cry for fun is big business. Hollywood has plenty of greenbacks to throw around, and since most of them are leftists through and through, it's become commonplace for the entertainment industry to support progressive causes. Cinemax, Warner Brothers, TNT, HBO, Universal Pictures, and even the Cartoon Network fund leftist entities. Who knew Bugs Bunny might need a safe space and despise Border Patrol? And while this next one might seem like a Ripley's Believe It or Not, PBS is not so bad after all. They may spout left-wing ideas 24/7, but they don't give to them. Doing nothing puts PBS at an advantage. Conservatives may want to let the good times roll with the following: Six Flags, Roku, Vizio, the Dish Network, and wait for it, the NBA. The NBA? Who knew? If after hearing this you decide to swear off movies and feel like catching a bite to eat out, you're no better off. Many national chain restaurants can't seem to resist the lure of progressives. Those include the Capitol Grill, the Olive Garden, Longhorn Steakhouse, and oh no, McDonald's. But you don't have to starve if your politics lean right. There's always Papa John's, the Waffle House, the Honey Baked Ham Company, and Krispy Kreme. So much for a restrictive Republican diet. But what about a good old-fashioned home-cooked meal? After all, that's why God invented kitchens. Unless you homestead and grow sprouts, the grocery store can be enemy territory as well. If you plan to vote with your wallet, then make sure your shopping cart is not filled with products from Minute Maid, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Frito-Lay, or Kellogg's and General Mills products. Sadly, Betty Crocker has become a lefty in her old age. Dang. If you feel like packing the kids up for some summer fun, dust off the pup tent and camp stove because voting your wallet may prove to be challenging. Conservatives should avoid Airbnb, all three major airlines, American, United, and Delta, as well as Sheraton and Marriott hotels. Renting a car, give Hertz the boot. They've been very bad boys by ending their partnership with the NRA. But this doesn't mean conservatives or libertarians will have to don a pair of Nikes. There's Avis, ExpressJet, AAA Travel, and Allegiant Air that still live and give to those on the right side of the political divide. If all this sounds depressing, you can simply throw up your hands in despair and forget all about it. But whatever you do, don't reach for that Prozac. Eli Lilly makes the popular antidepressant, and they fund a group called Unidos US. You might know them by their former name, La Raza. And that, my friends, about says it all. For more information on voting your wallet, visit secondvote.com. And that's my parting shot. And that's it for this edition of Truth is Making a Comeback. We invite you to check out our website, libertynation.com, where facts matter. Have a great week.
Truth is making a comeback. Visit us at libertynation.com.